Final Fantasy is a series that has been with me for the better half of a decade now. This series has seen me as a kid, teen, and now a young adult, allowing me to revisit the games with a different perspective each time I decide to play through one of them. That being said, I have played through almost all of these games, and at the top still stands the first one I ever played, Final Fantasy VII. This is because the game has some of my favorite characters ever, and my favorite soundtrack of all time, only rivaled by Killer Instinct. So obviously, when I got wind of a Final Fantasy VII Remake, I was skeptical. I hoped that Square knew what expectations they had set for themselves. So, when I heard there were a lot of delays and trailers full of spoilers, I was confused. And then the game finally came out and I loved it. The characters were almost more themselves than they were in the original, and the music was as beautiful as ever. The game does leave on a cliffhanger, and going into their remake, we knew that Square had planned out a trilogy already. So, it's March 9th, 2024, and I have just finished Rebirth, the sequel, and I have to talk about this. I almost don't know where to start. Going into this game, I didn't know what to expect at all from it. I had seen some of the earlier trailers, and I heard a lot of the newer ones were still spoilery, which Square really needs to fix. So I was like, okay, let me go dark on social media just to avoid all this. And that paid off so much. Going in blind to this game has got to be one of the best decisions I ever made. So to keep that experience for y'all, I decided to make half of this like spoiler free, and the second half will have Rebirth spoilers. However, the first half may have some remake spoilers in it, so like scattered throughout, but I'll try to keep it to a minimum. And I'll have a time code for when the spoilers start. As far as non-spoilers go, I feel like I can only really talk about gameplay in the overall world. So in comparison to Remake, it's like you've spent your entire life in your room, which is like Remake, and then you finally go outside, and you're 18 and you finally leave. That's what this feels like. That's what the upgrade is. And it's a relief. For me personally though, I don't really like open world games that often, which is sort of ironic. But the loop in this game is pretty fun, and it really rewards you for going around and doing all of the side stuff. However, I feel like this can only really be said for the first couple of big areas. After the third one, it feels slightly repetitive, but that also might be because I just wanted to do this story because it's so hooking and godlike. But overall, the world is really fun to traverse and rewards the player for exploration. And a lot of the side quests you can do with individual characters, or you're forced to, I guess. And they give you some really cool moments with the characters. And I feel like that was a really good choice. So it's optional, but at the same time, if you really want the full experience and get to know the characters more, I'd say you should just do it. Gameplay wise, it's like Square listened to everyone's complaints about Remake and fulfilled them and then some. The air combat is fixed and gives you multiple options instead of just an air 3-hit combo that doesn't target at all. Moreover, the air combat furthers the difference in between characters. For example, Red 13 is a dog, so it makes sense he can't just jump in the air. So to compensate for this, his ground attacks are super powerful, which brings a new element of party diversity, which I really thought was good. Similar to my Remake runs, I found myself sticking to one build that worked for the entire playthrough of the game. I saw a couple people complaining about this and claiming that there's only one way to play the game, which is just false. There are many options and different builds for each character, which is really fun and adds another layer for complexity to the combat. And that's also not mentioning that the party itself is something you can switch around. Like, you don't have to stick with the same party, which I think they did really well, just like the original. The biggest addition to Rebirth's combat is the inclusion of synergy attacks. These act as team-ups between two characters that, on top of doing really good damage, give the two characters a buff of some sort after they are performed. Most of the time, I forgot these existed because I was so used to the Remake combat, so it took some time for me to consistently use them, but once I did, I really enjoyed it. They really give a feeling of each character having their own personality in terms of gameplay, which I thought was really cool. Now, moving away from combat and exploration, throughout my run, I found that just like Remake at launch, some of the textures did not fully load in when entering new areas. This never brought me out of the game, it's just one technical oversight I can really think of. And this is like something I've found in a lot of Square games, so it's not unique to Final Fantasy VII really. They have it in FF16 too if you really look. So yeah, I think it was sort of annoying and I'm like, okay, well, why did they not touch this up? It's obvious that this texture is not loaded in and you're they'll have like Tifa here as like a character model, and then behind like the wall will just, the texture will have just not loaded in correctly. So that was a little bit of an oversight, but it's not that big of a deal. As per usual, the music in the game is the best in the industry and elevates the soundscape of the game to new levels. And as far as overall sound design, I've found that if you really pay attention throughout the game, it becomes more and more prevalent and honestly part of the narrative. It starts as this weapon sounds different from this weapon, and this character sounds different from this character. And then near the end of the game, you notice new things, which I think is really cool and really well done. So here's your spoiler warning. If you have not played the game, go play it. It's really good. Alright, here we go. So, this game changes a lot from the original. Most of the changes at the beginning are small character moments that honestly are more of expansions than changes. Like Tifa and Cloud arguing in Calm foreshadows Cloud's mental deterioration throughout the course of the game. Speaking of which, Cloud's character in this game is the best it has ever been. Instead of sticking to the original's vague and mysterious approach to Cloud's illnesses, they fully commit to showing us how it affects each big set piece. For example, at the Temple of the Ancients, Cloud starts to laugh like Sephiroth while fighting enemies, a new detail that had me physically shaking. The relationship between Cloud and Sephiroth is further explored more than the original because there is a greater emphasis on how Cloud interacts with the Cloaked People. Just like Remake, the Cloaked People appear as Sephiroth to Cloud. This has to be the most divisive decision and change in both games, because I saw so much hate for this, but I think it makes sense personally. They know they cannot top the original story, so they are doing a different take on it. Thus, all of these expansions and character moments are really the entire point of the Remake trilogy. Sephiroth is in fact at the heart of this. In the original, he is a more creepy figure who is shrouded in mystery throughout the game, and whenever Cloud is under his influence, the music stops, creating an eerie feeling that shakes me to my core still to this day. He has this double threat situation where while he ends the world, he will make Cloud his bitch, and this aspect is not really present in Rebirth. He's always there and can and will appear whenever he wants. I think this is a great choice, because part of the reason he is so scary in the original is because the game is a PS1 game. You cannot, in the modern era with 3D realistic graphics, recreate that feeling that Sephiroth gives the player in the original. However, you can't really talk about Sephiroth's involvement without talking about the final chapter of the game. So, I recently, after I finished the game, unblocked everybody on Twitter, unblocked all the words, and I've seen people absolutely trashing and clowning this part of the game. I get it to some extent. I feel like people are upset. Everybody's upset at different things. Personally, I don't think it's great. That's because the music and the heavenly environments in the original make it like the best part of the game, almost, in my opinion. It's haunting, and the second you hear City of the Ancients theme, you know something's off. You know something's not right. And this can't really be said for Rebirth. They use the City of the Ancients theme in the Temple of the Ancients, and they use it in Remake, so they slowly are like hinting towards it, and it's more of a build-up instead of like a bam and like a instant change moment. But Rebirth's reimagining has the misfortune of being at the end of the game, so it needs to have a boss gauntlet at the end, so it can't really be a super long chapter leading up to that. Due to this, the exploration of the city was cut. This is the part I have a problem with. I was so disappointed when I realized this. Walking around in the City of the Ancients and listening to that music and going down those like crystal blue steps, that stairway that's like a spiral, creates that environmental storytelling that is so essential to the original. And I was excited to see how they would redo that, but they didn't. And that kind of leads me to the saving grace for this part of the story, in my opinion, which is the drop of the City of the Ancients theme. It's just as crazy as the original. Not better, but it's just as crazy. You see a lot of people talking about how this chapter is the worst because of the ending, which I kind of disagree with. I actually really like the ending of the game. I think the boss gauntlet being a multi-character swapping experience was very smart, because that's the ending of the original game. And the inclusion of Zack was really well done, and I think it paid off his part of the story. But that brings me to my next piece. Zack's story in Rebirth is very far and few between. He appears in what feels like every 3 chapters, slowly piecing together the mystery of Remake's ending. This thread of the story is very enticing for me. The opening is amazing and sets the tone for the rest of the game perfectly. However, the beginning and first one is the best Zack segment outside of the ending with everybody else, leading to most of the other segments relying on the player to piece together what is going on. I kind of like this approach though, because I feel like I was being rewarded for being a fan of the game and being a fan of the whole series, because I was able to piece it together after I want to say the 3rd or 4th scene. To sort of sum up my thoughts on the ending, I understand that people are upset that the ending of the game leaves on like a confusing note or leaves on a ambiguous tone, but I would argue that's how Final Fantasy VII has always been. If you really think about it, the ending of the original game shows Aerith's face in the stars. Tell me that's not confusing, because there's so many reads of that, because that's at the beginning of the game too. You start the game by seeing Aerith, and you end by seeing Aerith, or I guess Eris, depending on what translation you're using. So that's a mystery in and of itself. So how does Remake and Rebirth's ending defy that to people? Well, they're saying that having Cloud flash between the 2 realities, the two, like one where Aerith dies and one where Aerith lives, it's confusing. I agree it's confusing, but again, that's what Final Fantasy VII is. And that's what they're going for in this new piece of the story. So I don't really mind it. Look at every single compilation of Final Fantasy VII game. You'll find the ending's a mystery. Original, Aerith's face. What does that mean? Crisis Core. What happened to Genesis? Remake. What's going on with Zack? What's going on with the Whispers? What's the next step? Rebirth. Did Aerith die? Did she not die? And if you want to get really technical, you can go back to Dirge. Where did Vincent go? So it's kind of a running theme that we don't really know what's happening at the end of any of these games. So I'm fine with it. However, people are also complaining about the ending cutscene being confusing. And I think that is really what they wanted. Because if you think about it, the ending shows Cloud as the link between the timeline where the party is and Zack's timeline where the gash is in the sky. So Cloud is the link between 2, because he can still see Aerith in that timeline because he saved her in that timeline. So he's the link. So what does this mean? This means that Cloud is the key to beating Sephiroth, just like the original. However, in the original, you only realize this way later, after Tifa and him put the memories together, put his memories back together. That's when you realize, oh wait, Cloud's the key. Cloud can actually beat Sephiroth. Now, Cloud has to beat Sephiroth. And they even tease that when he makes the promise to Aerith, and they're like, no promises are guaranteed at Journey's End, or something like that. So this sets up something really cool, because I feel like what they're trying to do is Sephiroth, throughout the course of this game, really messes with Cloud. He makes him doubt himself, makes him almost kill Tifa, and do all this crazy stuff. So they're leaning into that being a more important part of Cloud's character and just the game in Remake Part 3 in that game. Next, we got Vincent. So this man is my favorite FF7 character, and seeing him in high res was truly one of the highlights for me in this game. I loved everything they did with him in the game, except that's it. They didn't really do much because he's not playable. I know they have to save some cool stuff for the 3rd game, but my favorite character not being playable was obviously sort of disappointing for me. Though it does feel like they knew this and gave him the coolest boss fight in the game. So it leaves me looking forward to how he will play in Part 3. And I'm going to call it right now and say that Vincent's role in Part 3 will be a retelling of his arc in Dirge, serving as a, quote, redemption for that game to the masses. I see this because he literally transforms into Galleon Beast, foreshadowing his lack of control without the proto-materia. Alright, to kind of wrap these initial thoughts up, I'm just going to put the games in order, like the FF7 compilation games in an order of how I think they rank. I got Final Fantasy VII Original first, then I got Rebirth, then I got Remake, and then I got Crisis Core Reunion. Crisis Core is at the bottom because honestly, it's like nothing new. They just remastered it. It doesn't really count, to be honest. And I put Rebirth second because I feel like it's an evolution from a remake and from the original game, which is something that was shocking to me, how well they adapt the original in this game. They did not have to do a lot of what they did in this game. They did not have to make Aerith, her characterization and like how that bounces off of Cloud foreshadowing his inevitable fate that they tease. They did not have to make all of these things this good. They did not have to make Vincent have a cool ass boss fight. And yes, I'm going to be on that. They did not have to make the Dyne section, Corel section of the game as good as it was. That's like the only part of this new remake thing that I think is better than the original. Is like specific plot beat is that scene in Corel. Anyway, I'm about to sign off, and I'm gonna have like a discussion video coming up too, but yeah.